Hello there, Mary. Can you hear me? Thank you. All right. Let's see where we are here. There we go. All right. Move that out of the way. We're good to go. I see we've got a couple of minutes before we get started here. Hope everybody's doing well. Let me check. Let me reread this. Okay. Hmm. Okay. We got All right, I've got 7 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, those who joined me live this evening. This is week 7, Wednesday, February 26th. This week, technology, social media, cyberbullying, cyber issues. Uh, Hopefully you did a little reading on acceptable use policies for electronic devices. Your discussion board was examine a school or district policy on cyberbullying. Citing policy, explain your response to a parent presenting evidence of cyberbullying at your school. Before I get into that one, I want to remind you that next week we have our second case study. And you should already be working on your presentations. We'll debrief on that again in just a minute. And then the week following, we don't have class, spring break. That'll give you a chance to wrap up your OMA during that time, and then we'll start the schedule. I would say that I've been very pleased with the individual task of the OMA. Seems like we're right on pace with that. I'm very pleased with your OMA. I don't really have anything other than just keep at it. You're pacing yourselves. You're keeping up. You're doing your peer reviews. You're turning in. So I'm very pleased with your progress on that. You know the drill on the case study. We'll try to change up who gets to go first this time from last time. You know the drill on the case study. Look at the law. Look at policy. Look at ethics. Don't get confused by the noise or the things surrounding the case. Make sure that we'll look at that one a little bit later, but make sure that you focus on law and policy and ethics and not all the other stuff. So this week's discussion board was cyberbullying, and I want to remind you again, it does not matter where the cyberbullying took place in terms of where whose phone it was from or what computer, or was it sent from the school or any of those things. None of those things matter if it disrupts the educational environment. Somebody said, well, what does that mean? Well, if somebody comes and reports it to you that their child's upset or won't come to school, or is laying in wait for somebody and is going to beat the stuffing out of them when they come to school over something that's going on, bullying on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, then that impacts the educational environment. As we talked about last week, we had a case where one of the students wrote about, let me do this right quick, where the student wrote that there'd been some bullying going on, and then the student laid in wait for the other one to get off the bus, and the one that had been doing the bullying on social media, the other one attacked her and beat the stuffing out of her. Well, you've lost that school day. So certainly that disrupts the environment. Now, one of the things that I make sure I respond, every case of reported cyberbullying, if I was a principal today, every case of cyberbullying, the first thing that I would do is I would make the effort to walk down to the SRO's office and I would say, here's what's been reported to me. Do you want to get involved? I would give the SRO the first right of refusal on these. Now, as I told you before, I've worked with 4 in my career. 2 were very good. Isaac Pryor, Steve Morton, very good. I worked with 2 who weren't. The 2 who weren't, one of them was lazy. It wouldn't have mattered if you just said, there's a nuclear bomb out here in the mall, and we've got the person that did it. He'd say, well, I ain't got time for that. I've got training tomorrow, or wouldn't show up, but about half the time always had training. And then the other one that I had that was bad was Barney. Everything was a nuclear bomb. But somewhere in the middle, hopefully you have an SRO. But in cases like this, I would always give them the first right of refusal. Do you want to get involved in this? It may be a legal thing, and just like the one down at Huff High School, ended up being statutory rape, indecent liberties, sexting, that kind of thing, cyberbullying, coercing, getting naked pictures from these girls and then coercing them, blackmailing them to have sex with him. These were girls at the middle school next door. And all the evidence was in his phone, and you don't have the power of subpoena. Now, here again, let me reiterate: the police standard is probable cause, but they can get search warrants as well. You have reasonable suspicion, and you can search for much less. Like the smell of marijuana, you can search a kid. Police couldn't do that. That's not probable cause. But here's the thing: they also have the power of subpoena, and they can subpoena phone records. They can get in. You don't have that power. And so that's why I said I would always, every case of cyberbullying, the first thing I would do is I would say to the police officer, this is what I have. To my SRO, this is what I have. Tell me where you want me to go with this. Remember, they don't work for you. You can't tell them, go do this or don't do that. That will not go well for you, even with the best ones. You have to remember that they don't work for you. And so I always would make sure that I would give them on something like cyberbullying, which has much wider implications outside of the building. And sometimes the people that get involved are not under your jurisdiction. Let me say that again. Sometimes, many times, in cases of cyberbullying where you're using social media platforms, people other than just your students get involved. Students at other schools, parents, older siblings, they get involved as well. You have no jurisdiction over them. That's why, if you can, work this with your police. Now, having said that, it couldn't be more timely. I hate it for him, but it couldn't be more timely. Tonight, Dr. Douglas Massengill is not with us. And let me tell you why he's not with us tonight. I've got it queued up. I cannot make our Zoom session tonight. He sent me this today at about 5:30. A student made a threat against the school, and I've spent the whole day investigating with law enforcement. I am at school responding to parents who have concerns after our statement about the incident went out. Real life case study potential. And so a kid did a social media or a cyberbullying or social media threat against the school. And he has been in conjunction with law enforcement, because other people outside of the school building may be involved, has been investigating and working with them all day. And now he's handling parents who are scared to death. That's why I'm telling you, in cases of cyberbullying, very rarely will it be confined just to your students. And you have no jurisdiction outside of your students. Sometimes it's older siblings, younger people in the neighborhood, even parents. That's why you need to involve the police with cyberbullying. If they say, no, I'm not interested in that, then fine, go on about your business. But what you don't want to do is go blundering into something and destroy evidence, or warn people and they ditch their cell phones or able to cover their tracks, and then you're standing there with nothing. And again, you know, I've belabored this one, but I'm telling you, this is an everyday thing now. Do not fall into that trap of, well, it didn't happen here, so it's not our problem. It is your problem. It is your problem, just like bullying. Well, the bullying was happening elsewhere. It's not our problem. It is your problem if they're your students. Have a student harm themselves and see how well it goes for you that you didn't knew something was going on and didn't do anything about it. See how long you last in your position. Every day, I have my news feed set up every day. I've got something in here every day about somebody being put on retirement, suspension. Here's 4 principals announced retirement. I wonder how many of those 4 are being forced into retirement over bad decisions they made, not following up and following through on things that were happening in their building. At least the numbers tell us at least 2 of them are being forced out. I have it just, okay, here's one. Here's the superintendent's been charged with a social media violation here. I mean, it's every day where I don't know what it's going to take. I mean, people getting fired, people getting put on leave without pay, people getting terminated. It doesn't slow down. I just don't understand. Only thing I can think is it's just become so ingrained in our culture that nobody taught cyberbullying when I came through, and we think if we ignore it, it'll go away, or we can claim since we don't know where it happened, we don't have to deal with it. None of that is true. The law is clear. The law on cyberbullying was not repealed. It was not amended. The only thing that was the Twitter war business was struck out of it. If you're involved in a back and forth Twitter war, you start losing, you can't claim that you're being bullied. That's the only thing that changed in the cyberbullying law. The rest of it is still in place. Doesn't matter where it happens. And so I implore you, this is one of those, few times that I'm going to implore you, you cannot do what's been done in the past, which was little or nothing. You can't continue with that. You will not survive it. There's so many incidences this happens. The law of average says is you'll have one. And you may one time get away with covering it up or ignoring it, but you won't last long. You will not last long if you don't deal with cyberbullying. I know you don't want to. The old timers like my age, people will say, why would you take, that I ain't got a dog in that fight. Why would I get you? Yes, you do. And if you don't get involved with it, you will not survive. I'll just tell you that right now. And so next week, I'm going to cover the skip. I will cover that next week, and we'll kick that off. You should be about to task 4 now. You should be posting from all 4 in your OMA final evidence narrative. That is all 4 tasks together. Please remember to move your references and your appendices down after task 4. Make sure that the graphic representation of your new or proposed or amended schedule for prompt 2 of task 3, make sure it's in task 3 and not attached as an appendices. That's an APA violation. Remember, in APA, figures have to be in the main body of the text. They cannot be in the appendices. So if you remember, in task 3 of the OMA, you were asked to do a revised schedule or a modified schedule based on the work that you'd done, and that you were to graphically represent that. You actually draw out a little schedule. Make sure, and that's prompt 2 of task, of task 3. Prompt 1 was do a schedule. Prompt 2 was do it graphically so we could see it, so it looks like a little master schedule. Make sure that that's in task 3. Now, I've had a couple people ask me about task 4, where you write your 12. You pick the 12 you want, any 12 of the competencies you want to write. I would not write them as a single narrative. I would write communication and do a paragraph. Then I'd do change management. And then I'd do ethical concern. And then I'd do technology. I would do them separately. If you do them separately, you'll get a 4 when you get graded. If you do them all in one running narrative, you'll get a 3. That's just the way it works. So 3 will get you proficient. You know, that's just writing about them in a narrative. If you separate them out and address each one individually, that'll get you a 4. So please remember that in task 4. Task 4 doesn't have to be peer reviewed. I just have to look at it. I'll tell you, looks good. Put all 4 tasks together into your OMA final evidence narrative. When you put it together, you put it in, turn it in for the turn it in check, drop it in the Dropbox, assignment Dropbox for your final grade. I'll go to turn it in, check it immediately, tell you to put it in task stream, then we'll wait for your evaluation in there. Once you get your evaluation, you take your screenshot of it and upload it where the screenshot goes in the Dropbox. And then we're slick. We're moving on to the skip. Any questions? I saw one pop up a minute ago. Any questions on the OMA before we move on tonight? Which day are we presenting? Next Wednesday. You're presenting case study 2 next Wednesday. That's our last day before spring break. And I'll cover the tasks and the prompts at that day as well. And that won't take me but a minute to cover them. Instead of doing a review at the beginning, since there's no discussion board, the 5 minutes that I do a review and then the 10 minutes from, like I've done tonight, the 15 minutes that I normally do on the front end, I'll do on the skip task and prompts, and then we'll go straight into our case studies. I'll try to do it in 5 or 10 or less. But we've already been over those. There's no need for me to go into a long, boring discussion of them. And so I will cover them next week. The skip is very straightforward. It's the quickest and the easiest one to do. And so I'll go over those. So now I'd like to talk about next week in terms of, I would like to talk about, I got to move that out of the way. There it is. I'd like to talk about our case study for next week. All right. All right, so next week we're doing letter to the community. I wanted to make sure I read through this again. Now, let me do the disclaimer again. Part of your presentation or your response or your reflection should not say, I don't have enough information. You have more than enough information for what you're being asked to do. We would not give you case studies that you didn't have enough information. Now, it's not at your fingertips. You've got to go find it. So the first thing you're going to need to do is research the Leandro case, Leandro, Leandro. You're going to have to address the Leandro case. And it tells you that right here. First thing. Okay, first thing, be sure you've read Chapter 2, Resource Allocation and Financial Planning, in your resource book that we have as one of our 2 books. Make sure you read that chapter. Then review the Leandro case from North Carolina on school funding. And then you are to respond, is the superintendent's plan appropriate? Present both sides of the issue. No, it's not appropriate. Yes, it is appropriate. As a team, create a short PowerPoint presentation that addresses 2 and 3 above. You'll have 15 to 30 minutes, and then you'll do your reflection. Now, you don't have all that information in this, but the information you need is found in Chapter 2 and the review of the Leandro case. to know if this is a legal. How do we adjudicate case studies? We start with the law, then policy, then ethics. We don't start with our opinion. I think that's a great idea. That wonderful, but that's not how we do case studies. We start with the law. Is it legal? Does it follow law or policy or both? And then, so the law in this case is state funding. Now, what we're talking about here, when we're talking about money that the district, that comes to the district, that's allotted back out to schools, we're talking about state money and local money. We're not talking about federal money here. Federal money is specific to programs. It does not come per pupil. Let me say that again. You will read this in chapter 2, but let me highlight this for you. Federal money comes for specific programs, for specific students, and specific teacher salaries. There is no discretion. There is no manipulation of that fund. Federal money comes earmarked, as we call it. What are federal programs? CTE in high school. That's career and technical education. Those are federal programs. That money, those teachers are paid with federal funds, and money comes for their programs, and only can be used in those programs. Those teacher positions can't be used to teach English or math. It has to be that. Exceptional children, that money comes for those kids, those teachers. Title I, those kids, those teachers. So federal money is not part of this factor because it is not allotted on a per pupil basis. It is earmarked. So we will not be looking at federal money. So now, what money comes based on the number of students that attend, the number of students and staffing ratios? What money comes that way? State money, local money. See, I've had students say, well, Dale, it doesn't say state and local. Well, sure it does. It says based on the number of students and staffing ratios, that means state and local. That's what that means. How does the state allot us money? Mary's sitting there paying attention. I know. Mary's my A pupil. She's always right there on the front row. How is money allotted to schools by the state? Average daily membership based on the number of students attending. That means state money. State money comes based on the number of students. Local dollars come the same way. State and local dollars are based on the number of students that you have. They are tied together. Now, the question is, the superintendent wants to manipulate how much money schools get and not fund each school the same based on the number of students that they have, but based on high need students. He wants to manipulate state and local money. Remember, we're not talking about federal. Federal does not come based on the number of pupils. It's earmarked. Take federal out of this. We're down to state and local. That's the money that comes per pupil. That's the money that comes on staffing ratios as well. It's state money, local Board of Education money that came from the county commissioners. State and local, that's the money we're talking about. So the question is, the superintendent wants to manipulate, instead of saying you've got 800 students over here, you get 800 times $700 a month times your attendance percentage. So if it's 95, you get 95% of that amount. That's the way it's done now. This superintendent says, I don't like that. We have certain kids that are harder and more expensive to educate. we're going to give those schools more money. And our formula won't be based on average daily membership. It'll be based on need. And we're going to modify or manipulate both state and local money, so that if you've got 800 students and none of them are free and reduced lunch, we're going to give you $600 a pupil per month for the year. And if you've got a school over here that's got all free and reduced lunch kids, we're going to give you $800 per pupil. We're going to adjust the amount we give you. So remember, equal does not mean equitable. We're going to do equitable funding. We're going to give schools with more difficult kids and more expensive kids to educate, we're going to give them more money. We're going to manipulate state and local money to do that. You give the pros and cons of both sides based on law, policy, ethics. Do not let your opinion, now your opinion can enter into your reflection. In your reflection, you can say, I don't care what the law says, we ought to do this or we ought not do that. That's wonderful in your reflection, but not in your presentation. But now you need to pay careful attention to Leandro and what a student's basic right is, or what's commonly referred to now as their Leandro right. You need to understand that. There's a really good holding or finding, what's called held, from Duke Law School that summarizes it and what the language is that goes with this case study. You should find that. You should read those things. Go to Bulldog 1. So that's your task for next week: law, policy, ethical concern. But again, it's just, save your opinion for your reflection. All right. Anybody have any questions on our case study for next week? What the expectation is? All right. Very good. Let me move this out of the way so I can get to my dashboard here. All right. So this week is week 7. So this week is a continuation of week before last. We've already covered cyberbullying. Again, I wanted to hit it. Sexual harassment policies, it's also in our handbook. And then I did a sexual harassment presentation for DPI when I was their keynote at the Helpful Living back a few years back. But I want to go back to our disciplinary data reporting procedures, and I want to do a quick review. We report incidents, not outcomes. We report that 2 kids fought, not if we suspended them or not. Remember, the state's not prescriptive on punishment. That's the punishment, or the prescription for punishment, is in your local Board of Education code of conduct. It gives you a range. The state just says this is an infraction. You got to report it to us. The local says they did that, they get this. State does not get prescriptive on punishment. And so when people say, well, I didn't have to report that because I didn't suspend those kids, they won't last long in their job. It's a miracle that they got a job that done, but so everybody's brother-in-law's got to have something to do. And so, but I mean, seriously, the state does not do outcomes. They don't care what you did or didn't do to kids. They're all about incidents. And remember, they have the added burden now since 2014. They have to deal with the Office of Civil Rights. I used to have to do that when I did this for Charlotte-Mecklenburg. Up until 2014, you had to do this, negotiate this by district. And it was a nightmare, everything that they wanted to know. And so we report all these incidents to them. They have a wonderful section on terminology and who's responsible. You got to have a data manager or disciplinary data coordinator. That'll be the lowest assistant principal on the totem pole. That will be you. When you get your job, you will be called the disciplinary data coordinator. But in the end, the principal's responsible. And so if you're threatening the principal's job by doing a bad job, they'll just nix you. See, OCR now, that's in here. Reporting zero tolerance expulsions, those are illegal, by the way. But if you do it, you got to tell the state that you did it. Just like seclusions and restraints are illegal, but you have to report those. If you do, if somebody on your faculty does it, you have to report it. But you're not supposed to do it because they're illegal. But if it did happen, then you got to report it. You say, well, if it's illegal, you wouldn't do it. Yes, people do it all the time. People, get all excited and mad. Kid did X, Y, and Z. We're not even going to give him due process. He gets this. Or, you get teachers all the time who seclude or restrain kids because they can't get them under control. It's against the law, but you have to report those things if they happen, along with incidents. And so here are all the things that have to be reported. Procedures for reporting incident data, Power School, it has all these scenarios. It tells you how to do all this stuff. It defines for you, see again, reporting uses of seclusion and restraints. They're not disciplinary incidents, but the Power School reporting use of restraint. Again, this is, you're not supposed to do this. But if it happened at your building, you have to report it. That meant that one of your faculty or staff actually broke the law. Doesn't matter who did it. When you put an incident in, you have to designate whether it was student, staff, or other. And so what they're saying is, here are 3 things that the staff can do that's against the law only in schools, but you got to report it. And that is excluding a kid with zero tolerance, not allowing him any due process, excluding him, diversive procedures or exclusion and restraint. If you do those things, you must report those to us. They are violations of the law and must be reported. Reporting assaults, all these things. So anything that happens has to go into Power School, and most anything that goes in Power School, you're going to have to tell police about it. Reported to law enforcement. It'll pop up. It's an automatic when that happens. Watch 2 reports entered today, seclusion and restraint. That is correct. That is correct. It happens. I hate to say it. I was making my school visits early this semester. Was it early this semester? No, it was early last semester, last fall. I was at a middle school, not too far from Gardner Webb. I was in a middle school, and I had met with the principal, and she was all excited to have an intern. I went down to the intern's room, and he wasn't nearly as excited as the principal. And I left his room and started walking out, and I saw a illegal restraint being done on a young man out in the hallway. I did. I saw an illegal restraint being used on a young man out in the hallway. And it was egregious. I'm betting the school didn't report it though, but it happens. He was a little out of control, and completely inappropriate restraint. Completely, no way to defend it in court. No way. And so you got to report those things. Now, what I want to spend the next amount of time on, and again, incident sites, as you can see, it doesn't matter on the bus. So this notion that if 2 kids fight on the bus, that we can give them less punishment than fighting in school. No, fighting is fighting. As you can see, incident sites, these things all are the same. If you fight at the bus stop, if you fight on the bus or at school, the location doesn't matter. Fighting is fighting. We can't call everything that happens on the bus misbehavior and just, suspend kids off the bus for a day. If your code of conduct says you get 5 days, the minimum is 5 days, the maximum is 10 days out of school suspension for fighting. Fighting on the school bus can't just carry a 1 day off the bus. As you can see here, the state says these are all the same. It doesn't matter if you're fighting in the parking lot, on the bus, in the building, it does not matter. If you're downtown at the museum and you fight down there, that's what's called off school grounds. If you're on a school field trip and you get in a fight in Atlanta, it's still a fight. You've got to know that. See, what happens is folks try to play hard and, fast and loose with the rules. Well, it didn't happen at school. It didn't happen until you get caught. And they'll refer you back to this manual that lays it out for you completely. You have no wiggle room here. It tells you your incident site codes right here. And this is the same no matter doesn't matter where it happens on that list, it does not matter. It's all the same. Offender or victim types. Can't say, well, that lady slapped that kid, but she doesn't go to school here, so we don't have to report that. Yes, you do. If it happened at your building, you have to report it. And then here are all the different, according to the state, here's all the things that bad behavior things that can happen. Now, we start out with PDs, which is persistently dangerous. That means it counts against our calculation for a persistently dangerous school. And I'm going to cover that in just a minute. RO is reportable offense. You have to tell law enforcement. Now, there are 4, as I told you before, that have a UB, unacceptable behavior, which means they're not classified as a reportable offense, or they're not classified as a persistently dangerous, but because they have a general statute number behind them, communicating threats, alcohol, disorderly conduct, and affray will be here somewhere, AFFR. Burning a school building, because those have a suffix behind them. There it is. There's affray. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There it is. There's the 5. There are 4 together here and then another one. Because they have a general statute, that means that's a violation of the law and it has to be reported to law enforcement. And so here are all the things that can happen in a school. And so there's pretty much nothing that happens that doesn't have to be reported in Power School and then to police most of the time. Reporting categories, Power School behavior types, again, all these different ones, it's kind of a repeat. Consequence actions, this is outcomes. They have all the different ones of these listed. So when people say, I didn't have to report that because I didn't suspend them, if you gave any of these consequence types, it has to be reported to the state. And even if all you did was do a conference with the student, it does not matter. It doesn't just say consequence out of school suspension, but we'll have people, I've had APs one time argue with me, oh, I didn't have to report that because I didn't give them out of school suspension. Look at the consequence type. What? If you assigned any of these, it has to be reported. Well, I don't think it ought to be that way. I don't care. We don't pay you to think. Stick with your strong suit. And I, after the second time I called them, that was the last time, because I was done with you. You couldn't follow the law. You couldn't, you're putting the district at risk of lawsuit, getting and underreporting, and the public fallout that comes from underreporting this stuff now, and then something blows out. You can't survive it as a school administrator. I'm just going to tell you, you can't. You underreport stuff or ignore stuff or hide stuff, and then something big blows up, and people find out, you're cooked. Not only will you lose your job, they're going to see, they're going to sue you for malfeasance, that you intentionally did this. If you've got this handbook that spells all this stuff out and you decide not to follow it, that's malfeasance, folks. You know, nonfeasance, misfeasance, and malfeasance. Nonfeasance, you didn't do anything. Misfeasance, you did something that just happened to be wrong. But malfeasance is you intentionally, you knew the rules and did it anyway. That's when you lose your house. And see, you better read this manual, right? This is the most important document you will ever have as a school administrator, a starting school administrator. Because this is where you're going to make your mistake if you're not very careful. And you've got no buffer on this stuff, because you're going to be the disciplinary data coordinator. Nobody wants to be this because the liability is too great. And whoever the new person is, it always falls to them. And that's sometimes why there's a new person. The last one got axed over this. And so you better know that if you assigned any of these consequences, any, A-N-Y, look how many there are, my Lord, then it's got to go in there. If nothing more than just a conference, it's got to go in there. And then the victim types, the weapon types, all these other different codes. And then we get to the bad stuff. There are 16 acts of crime and violence. And here they are. Assault resulting in serious personal injury, assault involving the use of a weapon, assault on school official, employees, and volunteers, making bomb threats or engaging in bomb hoaxes, willfully burning a school building, homicide, kidnapping, unlawful underage sale, purchase, provision, possession, consumption of alcoholic beverages, possession of controlled substance in violation of the law, possession of a firearm, possession of a weapon, rape, robbery with a dangerous weapon, sexual assault not involving rape or sexual offense, first degree, sexual offense with a child, second degree sexual offense, statutory rape, and in taking indecent liberties with a minor. Now, I don't want to read these because they get pretty graphic, and I'm a Baptist. But suffice it to say, they're very graphic in their explanation of what these things are. Now, 9 of these 16 count against you in your persistently dangerous calculation. So let's go back up and quickly look at those. That would be the PDs right here. Assault using a weapon, assault resulting in serious injury, homicide, kidnapping, physical attack with firearm or explosive device, rape, robbery, sexual offense, sexual assault, taking indecent liberties with a minor. All right, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, so those 9, those are called acts of violence. So all 16 of them are called acts of crime and violence, but those 9 specifically that have that PD designation in front of them are called acts of violence. Now, what makes them different and special is those will cause you to lose your job. Remember, we talked about antecedent behaviors. The little things become the big things. These are the big things that you don't want to happen, because if at any 2 years consecutive you exceed the allowable limit of these PD incidents on your building, your campus, you will lose your job. Let me say that again. Any 2 consecutive years that you exceed the allowable limit for these PD incidences happening at your school, you will lose your job. Period. It's not state law. It's not local policy, it's federal law. In 1991, No Child Left Behind, you've heard of that. If you have, everybody shake your head. Everybody's heard of No Child Left Behind, but they've only heard of the side that addresses academics. There's another half of that as well that addresses persistently dangerous schools. Persistently dangerous schools are defined as schools that have an inordinate number of acts of violence. We designate those acts of violence with a PD prefix. Hence, you see that on the screen. PD, that stands for persistently dangerous. That means that one counts against your calculation for the number of those, the threshold that you can have during any one academic year. So the first year that you exceed the threshold of those incidents, you go on the state watch list. State comes out and does an audit and puts you through all kinds of really bad stuff. And if they find out that, you're okay as a school and that, your blood's not running down the hallway, they'll let you continue on to the next year. You'll just be on the watch list. Now, that second year that you exceed that limit, that you didn't put anything in place to stop those big things from happening, you didn't get involved in antecedent behaviors and try to stop the little things before they became the big things, and you exceeded 2 years in a row, one of two things has to happen. Either they have to reconstitute the school, that means you're out, or they have to let all the kids there, have to bus them to another school in the district. Well, we tried that a little bit years ago when this first came out, and we had a couple of PDs in Charlotte. We tried that, busing kids to other schools. That's no es bueno. You can't do that. That's no way. And so we have to start reconstituting schools, and that means the principal has to go and an administrative team. They all have to go when you reconstitute school. And so 2 years of these will cause you to lose your job. Now you begin to understand why you've heard me whine and complain and argue for 2 different nights now. You got to report all this stuff. So what people do to try to avoid the sanctions that come with PD, they try to hide this stuff. They try to underreport it. You can see assault involving a serious injury. I got a call from the legal department and said one of our employees was suing us because his workman's comp had been turned down. And I said, okay, give me more information. They said, well, he was seriously injured over at one of our schools. They were dealing with it was one of our public separate schools that dealt with violent kids, what we used to call BED. And they were trying to get him into the protective room. And somehow the fellow's arm got caught in the door, and basically the skin was all it was on. I mean, it just tore his arm just almost completely off. And he was out of work for 6 months and had to have multiple surgeries and all that. And I said, okay. And they said, well, he was turned down for workman's comp because the principal said that he was not seriously injured. And so I called the principal, and she said, well, I went over there, and she said, well, we'd have made over the threshold. I said, but because you reported it as non-injury, workman comp won't pay his claim. And he's been out of work for 6 months with no salary, got all these medical bills. And you're telling people he wasn't seriously injured. She said, well, he's going to get the use of his arm back. I'm like, he's been out of work for 6 months. He's had a handful of surgeries. He's hoping to get some use of his arm back. And you're over here quibbling because, you don't want to put it down because it's going to look bad on your paperwork. She got the opportunity to work elsewhere pretty quickly. But that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. There's always ramifications. People get cold feet. They go home and they think about it. The excitement of the moment, the blood's up out of the hallway. And so the next thing you know, well, it wasn't really, we start rationalizing, well, it wasn't really as bad as I thought it was, and all those kinds of things. Yes, it was. This is the underreporting part. So now the law says kids don't have to go to persistently dangerous schools. And so what is the threshold? It's based on your enrollment. And so if you've got, so you get 5 incidents for every 1,000 kids, or 1 incident. And so I had some people say, well, we don't have 1,000 kids, we don't qualify. No, that's 1 for every 200. That's 0.0, that's 0.5%. You can't exceed 0.5%. That's a half of 1%. You can't have more than 1 incident for every 2 kids a year of these kind of incidents, or 5 for every 1,000, or 10 for every 2,000, or like in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, 15 for every 3,000 kids in high school. The high schools are allowed somewhere between 12 and 15 of these incidents a year. You know, if you're a small elementary school, you might not get but 3, but the chances are you having these in a small elementary school are slim if you do the right thing. If you work on the little things and don't let them become the big things, you do okay on these. Now, let me point out one other thing before I move on. I'm keeping an eye on our time here. So it's 1 for every 200, 0.5 for every 100, 0.5, half of 1%. Now, this is the one that jumps up and bites you faster than anything else on here. And I'll get you questions just 1 second when I get to it. All right, before I point it out, let me look at the question. Okay. All right. Shawana Ward raised her hand. All right. So go right ahead.
All right, Dr. Lamb. 2 quick questions. When we were looking at the chart, what we need to report into Power School once a consequence is assigned, we have to report to the state, ASD, lunch detention, all of that, or just like ISS, OSS?
No, everything. You don't report outcomes, you report incidents. We don't report ISD. No, we report what caused that to have happened. So what did the student do to get the ISD?
Okay.
That's what we report. See, that's what I said. That's the slippery slope that costs you your job.
Okay.
When folks don't understand, we don't report outcomes. ISD, OSS, that's an outcome. We report incidents. They were fighting. They were bullying. They were pushing. They were cheating. They were disrespectful. That's what we report. So that's why I said we have to report everything based on what happened on incidents. Even if we had 2 kids that shot one another.
Right.
And all we did was, and we said, well, we're not going to suspend them so we won't have to tell anybody. That's not the point. We're not even going to do anything. We report what they did, not what we did as a result of what they did. So everything.
And the reporting goes through, sorry.
Pardon?
The reporting goes through Power School?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
My
Power
second
School
question
has an incident reporting module. That's why I've said sometime during those 3 sections on your suggested activities during your clinical, and one of them says Power School. That's what we're talking about. Teachers have this notion that Power School is just what they see. You only see about 1/100th of Power School. When you get an administrator credential, there's all kind of other modules that are in Power School. There's an entire module on incident reporting, and that's the only that's the only way that you can officially document, legally document incidents. Is it's got to go in Power School. It has to go in Power School, or it's not official. And if you want to generate documents for an in or out of school suspension, the only way is it's got to be entered into Power School. If you select that as a consequence, it'll automatically generate the letter. But just because it generates a letter, from some people believe, well, that's all I have to report is just things that's going to generate letters. No, the manual is very clear. You have to report incidents, not outcomes. Now, I know that there are schools in North and South Carolina that have been ignoring this for years until you get called. And then you lose your house. And you can say, well, they were doing it long before I got, yeah. But the manual says you get caught, you lose your job. You get a class 1 misdemeanor, you lose your license, you lose your job. This is also malfeasance because you knew better. The manual told you better.
Right.
So you got to be real careful in that. Now, where does PBIS fit in this? Well, PBIS is I am probably not the biggest fan of PBIS because I think it's a good program, but it's used to cheat the reporting system. That's just, that's all. I mean, I'm just going to be blunt. It's used to cheat. It's a way to keep referrals from getting to the office so we can keep from having to report stuff that happened. PBIS has been used incorrectly in 90% of the schools it's used in. It's used as a way to keep stuff from getting in Power School. It doesn't make things better in schools, it makes things worse. One of my doctoral students did her dissertation on PBIS in the high school, and the data collected, the number of suspensions went through the floor. They reduced by hundreds. But then when we went out and we asked teachers, they said, what are you talking about? We don't have a PBIS program. They said we did, but we never got trained and we're not using it. They were just using it as an excuse to hide suspensions so that somebody wouldn't question why their suspensions dropped 2/3 in 1 year. That's right. They dropped from 900 to 300 in 1 year. And when people said, what's the mirror? Oh, we put in PBIS. We went and asked the teachers, and to a teacher, every teacher in the building said, no, we didn't do any of that. They announced at the first workday we were going to do PBIS. That's the last we heard of it. They were just using it as an excuse not to report suspensions. So that's my problem with PBIS, not with the program itself. It's a wonderful program, but people are using it for bad purposes. Now, what happens is it makes schools havens for criminality and unsafe places for the students and for the adults that work there. That's the problem. Dale, why are you being such a stickler on this? Because you're making these places unsafe. And you're feeding people's fears. That's why people are fleeing the public schools and going to charters and privates. It's because we've done it to ourselves by being dishonest, unethical, illegal. And people know when the blood's running in the hallways. They know, there's been a bomb threat or something bad's happened, but it never gets reported. Parents and students know the places that are unsafe. Do you think that high school that the parents and the students thought it was any safer just because they were hiding suspensions? No, they said it was worse. It was worse. They said it was worse year they'd ever had. The data said that the suspensions were down 2/3. The teacher said, and the student said it's the worst school year we've ever had here. We're afraid to come to work. So that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about losing your job, losing your house, and we're talking about making schools havens for criminality and further hurting our market share today. That's what we're talking about.
Okay. I have another question about the restraint and seclusion being illegal.
Yeah.
If I read the general statute correctly, why do they say permissible use if it's illegal?
There is permissible use of seclusion and restraint by people who were trained, and that's their job. BMTs, people who have had that ACC training, but that's their job.
Yes,
what I was talking about, I saw an impermissible use of restraint. I saw a man. He's not as big as me. I don't know if y'all can tell from the video here. I'm a pretty good sized fellow. He wasn't as big as me, but he was a large man. And he had looked like maybe a 4th or 5th grader. He had his hand clamped across the back of that child's neck and had his head bent down to his chest. And that was the way that he was restraining him. And it was obviously cutting his air off. And that cut his air off without leaving a mark. And of course, he gave up. But that's an impermissible use of restraint.
Okay, I understand.
And so your
What I
BMTs,
witnessed today
your
by
ACC
BMT.
trained people, they do it, but they don't choke people out.
No, there was no choking.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I watched this person choke this kid down. He went down to his knees. Now he didn't do it the traditional way where you can crush the windpipe or leave a mark. He did it by, again, forcing the kid's neck down
Slump. Mm-hmm.
onto his chest and cutting his air off. Pretty sneaky way to do it.
Yes, sir. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you. All right. Do we have anything else that we need to answer? We're getting down near the end here. How do you handle incidents mandated to be handled in classroom? Well, you handle them in classroom. Again, we're using that as a way to keep referrals from getting to the office. If a referral comes to the office, no matter what you do, even if you just conference with the kid, you have to put it in Power School. PBIS is being used as a way to keep referrals from getting to the office. If you have no choice once they get to the office of what you do with them according to this manual that you're reading right here in front of you, then the trick is keep them from getting to the office. You know, that's pretty simple. Once they come to us, once the referral lands on our desk, this manual says legally this is what you've got to do with it. The trick is, how do we keep those referrals from landing on our desk? We just keep teachers in a constant state of bouncing kids and doing all this stuff down in the classroom, and our numbers do better. A bad number goes down, but our schools get less and less safe. And that's what my argument is. This is what happens now. Kind of the last thing, we're not going to get to the presentation. Watch this presentation that I did, and it has some prevention and identification of antecedent behaviors and development prevention strategies to assist schools in decreasing violence. This is what I'm talking about. Here are the things: gang activity, sexting, sexual harassment, and cyberbullying. This is what leads to those bad things happening in your building. Those persistently dangerous. They don't start out as persistently dangerous. They start out in these kinds of things. The little things become the big things. So you can look at my presentation here. I've got all the laws and all the federal and state laws and those things behind it here. Okay, great class. Thank you, Sandra. All right, so make sure you look at this, and this is the last thing for the evening. Make sure that you understand this is the one that trips up even the best administrators who are trying to do the right thing. Please understand that if a person is mentally incapacitated, mentally disabled, or physically helpless, they cannot consent to any kind of sexual behavior. Let me say that again. I'm going to stop my share here and go back and see what we got. If you have a person, welcome Dr. Tobias, if you have a person that's say 16, 17 years old in a high school, but they're mentally incapacitated, mentally disabled, physically disabled, they cannot consent to any sexual activity, no matter that they're in North and South Carolina. The age of consent is 16. So one of the things that always happens is folks say, well, it was consensual. It was consensual. It's not an infraction. We don't have to deal with it. If a child's in exceptional children's program, unless it's gifted, if a child's in EC, that covers them. We say, well, but they're not self-contained EC. Doesn't matter. If they're learning disabled, it says they're mentally disabled. If they're LD, that's what the D stands for in LD, is disabled. I've had this wore me out in court on this one. They don't have to be self-contained. That's the mentally incapacitated statute. That's that piece. The mentally disabled piece that was added after the initial one is the one that gets you in school. The LD kids that run around here that are identified, they're 16 years old. By legal definition, they cannot consent. That one will get you. That one will jump up and bite you. Everybody knows a kid that's over down in the self-contained unit can't consent. Everybody understands that. The one that gets them is the mentally disabled people. the LD kids, the autistic kids, the ones that for some reason have their libidos up here and their inhibitions are down here, they don't match. Those kids, that's the ones that get you. That's the ones that sneak up on you, and you get those persistently dangerous activities happening. That's the ones. They used to drive me crazy. I've supervised high schools that drove me crazy. I had one high school. I told them, I said, we just got to get a hose pipe and put in here to spray these kids. Y'all, how dare you let them go to the bathroom by themselves? You know what's going to happen. It was just every week I had to deal with it. But that's another story for another day. Dr. Tobias, thank you for joining us tonight. I told them Dr. Massengill, he's working with the police. He's had a threat of some kind, cyber attack on his school today. He's having to deal with the fallout with parents tonight. So we'll get him to tell us about it next week. You have anything that you'd like to add tonight?
I do want them to listen to what you said about reporting your acts. If I can back up and go before that, one of the better things to do for your prevention is to create a climate or a culture that people know what is expected, the kids, the teachers, everyone. So then discipline becomes not your always focus, and then you don't have to stress about so much, but create a climate and a culture that is strong and has high expectations. And then you won't have to stress so much about all the reportable acts because it becomes a big deal after a while. And my AP is the handler of that, but I always tell her the buck stops with me.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm the one that has to deal with it. But we create a culture of such high expectations that we don't deal with a whole lot of discipline. Coming in the gate, the kids know what we expect.
Mm-hmm. But part of that expectation is that teachers know that you're not devising systems to hide what's going on and telling them to deal with it and blaming them for kids' bad behavior. That it's a cultural thing of teaching and learning. And that's why I argue so vehemently about this, and this is such a biggie with me. See, schools that do that use PBIS as a dodge and a hide, they're not places of teaching and learning. They're not safe. We don't have a community of learners. We don't have a community of respect. We're a warehouse. We're just warehousing kids. We don't care a lot for them. We don't care a lot for the people that work in the building. We don't care enough to try to make it a safe and caring place. And if you build that culture of teaching and learning, of respect, that we're going to do the right thing, that this is not acceptable, that's hard. That's easy to say and hard to do. But that's the only way that you're going to be successful in the school business. Otherwise, you become just a slaughterhouse. You just become a warehouse for children, and that's just untenable. That's why we're losing market share to other people. I can tell you why. I think a lot of parents who opt out know that are aware that their child might not be getting the best education that they could get, but they feel like they're safer. I'll use my own brother-in-law as an example. In the part of the world where they live, he said, I know that this is not the best school, but he said, I just think he's a lot safer there. I can't argue with that. I just can't argue. I see we're over our time. I appreciate you all being with me tonight. Be trying to wrap up your OMA. Remember, be working in your groups. Next week, we're going to do our funding case off of Leandro. I'm excited as usual to see what y'all going to have to say. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We'll see you next week.